After Nero, the Roman people got tired of war, and they had a period of time, 200 years of Pax Romana. The Roman peace. Now, there were a few times when the Roman peace was interrupted, but for the most part, the Roman people lived in 200 years of peace, and for the one and only time in Western history, the Mediterranean world was united under one political entity. And a lot of persons wish that could still be true, or wish it could remain true. But Rome. Now, I want to jump ahead just a little bit. This is the only world history book I have seen, folk, where they put China in the same chapter as the Roman Empire. Therefore, your test will have at least 4 questions about China. And those of you who read the chapter know what I'm talking about. And they want to compare. In other words, at the same time that Rome was thriving and prospering, had an empire, far on the other side of the big continent of Eurasia, Eurasia, Europe and Asia, I guess sometimes called Eurasia. Far on the other side was another empire, China, at the same time. A lot in common. They had a lot that was different. Your book makes comparisons. At the end of the chapter, I'm going to make the same comparison. So, anyway, the 5 good emperors. They are Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius Pius.
Wait, read these people again?
The good emperors. And finally, Marcus Aurelius. I'll put his name over here so you can do. Marcus Aurelius. Now, if you're ever taking a multiple choice test, and they ask you who the 5 good emperors were, and you see Nero as one of the choices, pick another choice. No, Nero would not be one of the choices. Anyway, 5 good emperors.
What's the last one?
Marcus Aurelius. Antonius he had the surname of Pius because he was more religious than most of the people of his day. So they called him Antonius Pius. Marcus Aurelius, he's figured into some movies, including the one Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. There have been a few movies made about him, but I'll talk about him especially later. Under these emperors, Rome, at least the upper classes prospered. You know, as I say, the upper classes. By the way, Rome lost its middle class. One of the things I pointed out when I was doing my paper, the middle class disappeared from Rome, and Rome had extremely rich at the top and extremely poor at the bottom, with nobody in between. And of course, this made it really difficult for persons to move economically. Under Trajan broke Caesar Augustus' law. Caesar made a law that we're never going to go back to Germany again. Well, Trajan conquered part of Germany, and under him the empire reached its greatest extent. Aqueducts were built. Aqueducts carried fresh water, and they didn't dig pipes like we do today, which are guaranteed to eventually cave in. I mean, we had a pipe here in Atlanta that was built in 1911, cave in and kill somebody, swallow up a car, right just off the interstate a bit, and nobody knew where the pipe exactly. We were still using it, but nobody knew exactly where it went. I mean, there were no records, and they eventually had to send someone in to figure that out, and they had to order the pipe apart because nobody made pipes that size anymore. But the Romans built aqueducts, and they carried the water above ground, and the water would purify itself after it had gone through several miles of gravel. I don't really know how they did in the winter time, because in winter, unless the fast-moving water will not freeze. Anyway, they built theaters, and some of the theaters could hold 50,000 people. Roads, bridges, temples, and government buildings, all kinds of construction projects. Now, each of these men would handpick his successor, and none of them were his sons of the former. What these men would do, they would, and folk, anyway, I'm going to say this. They would pick a young boy who looked to be the brightest, had the best personality, most promise, and they would adopt him, and oftentimes, yes, enter into a sexual relationship with him, and make him the next emperor. But when he died, everybody knew who the next emperor was, so this guaranteed there'd be no power struggle, because they would give the next emperor, more and more authority as time went on, to where when the former emperor died, the next one would just simply step into his shoes. This went on again for you might say five generations, almost 100 years, 96 to 180 CE. By this time, our dating is in CE, and we used to call it AD, but now we call it CE, the Common Era. It used to be, it was BC, before Christ, AD, in the year of our Lord. Now it's before the Common Era, BCE, and CE in the Common Era. Anyway, the provinces, these men appointed governors over the provinces, and in general, most of the provinces were placated and things were peaceful. There was a lot of trade that went on. Now, there were two provinces, though, in particular, that Rome never did placate. Judea here, which went through two rebellions and finally the Romans kicked the Jews out of Judea, and the British. In the case of the British, the Romans defeated the British uprising. But then when the Germans moved in, the Romans said to Britain, you handle it yourself. We just can't afford to keep you up to it. The Romans abandoned Britain. Romans did not have a whole lot of influence in Britain, but they did leave a few of their place names there and stayed there for about 100 or so years, and then they abandoned Britain to its own fate. The Roman Empire was one of the greatest that the world had ever seen. In the West, they spoke Latin. In the East, they spoke mostly Greek. Again, thanks to Alexander and his influence, this was part of the Hellenistic world. They spoke mostly Greek. Over here, mostly Latin. In general, things were never better, even though there were some ominous signs over the horizon. Things were not right. All right. In the area of culture, the greatest poet of the age was Virgil. V-I-R-G-I-L. I might ought to write that down. Now, unlike Greece, Rome did not produce very many philosophers. The Romans were more practical than the Greeks and less philosophical. The most famous philosopher was Cicero, whom I've already mentioned. And he was the one who refused to take an army and chided Julius Caesar for it. Eventually, Cicero was banished and died in exile. And one of the emperors noticed his son reading something. He wondered, hey, what are you reading? Well, he finally noticed his son was reading Cicero, and his emperor said to his son, "Oh, go ahead." In his own way, he was a good man. The emperor's family did not like Cicero because they had condemned the ways of Julius Caesar and condemned the whole idea of an empire. But the emperor said, hey, in his own way, he was a good man, even though we don't agree with him. The son was afraid that the father would be angry at him for reading a philosopher like Cicero.